Invincible Season 3 is finally here. God damn. And I gotta say, it was definitely worth the wait. And yes, speaking of waiting, this video was supposed to come out on Friday. Yes, I know. Long story short, if you didn't see my Discord announcement or community post, my PC decided to blue screen on me right when I was 2 paragraphs away from finishing the recording. So yeah. That was a lot of fun. So everything got corrupted and I was like, you know what, screw this. So be sure to hit the like and sub button so that I can afford a ticket to Microsoft HQ so I can beat the ever-loving shit of whoever decided to blue screen my PC, because I know it is deliberate by the creators and the devs. I know it is a deliberate thing that they do to fuck with you.
Not enough politics!
Let's talk about Invincible Season 3. With 3 whole episodes, damn near half the season getting dropped on us all at once, there's a lot to talk about. Too much for one video. So this video is going to be about a particular conflict between 2 of our main characters, and then next week we're going to return to episodic coverage. The conflict in question, of course, is the falling out between Mark and Cecil, and goddamn, there are so many layers to this falling out. But let's be a little bit chronological and take a little trip to the past. Cecil's past. We see a young Mr. Stedman tracking down some criminals who plan to unleash a deadly bioweapon that'll end up killing thousands of people. But through wit and a little bit of deception, Cecil, by the skin of his teeth, and his whole body, manages to put a stop to it and minimizes the casualties. So Cecil needs a skin replacement, and he doesn't allow the doctors to replace the last bit of his natural skin on the side of his face, hence where the scar comes from. And the reason he didn't let them replace that is because, quote,
"It's a reminder that I messed up, and to never let it happen again."
It's very apparent right away that even though Cecil saved thousands of lives, he's still very beaten up that 17 people still lost their lives due to this bioweapon. And the current director of the GDA tries to reinforce to Cecil that no, this was a victory, you saved so many lives today. But Cecil simply just can't accept that. We flash forward a little bit and see the infamous Lizard League jumping the fledgling GDA, and we see a young Cecil trying to get the current director to safety. But they kind of get cornered, and the only reason they survive is that those 2 criminals who unleashed the bioweapon are now working for the GDA. Even though they're criminals, they've clearly reformed and are trying to make up for their mistakes. But that's kind of cut short when Cecil shoots them both in the head, declaring that he will never work with criminals. However, the current GDA director aims to change that viewpoint. He puts Cecil in prison because he did commit murder, and over the next 3 years in prison, Cecil turns a chaotic and lawless environment into a structured, organized system. And it's here we learn something pretty interesting. I'm sure we're all familiar with Cecil's famous quote, "We can be the good guys, or we can be the guys that save the world, we can't be both." And it turns out that that quote comes from the previous director of the GDA. And by putting him in prison, Cecil was essentially forced to work with criminals, and after 3 years, his mindset about working with them has clearly changed, as the director points out. And since the current director is stepping down, he offers his place to Cecil. Cecil initially refuses, but then he comes around and decides to take the job. Now let's move back to the present. Apparently, our favorite psycho doctor, Doc Seismic, made friends with some absolutely enormous bugs that came from, the Hollow Earth, I guess? So I guess now the Godzilla Monsterverse and the Invincible universe are now one in the same canonically. Confirmed. The bad Dr. Seismic also makes the very intelligent, but also kind of sucky move of kidnapping every single hero, except of course for Eve and Mark. So it's up to those 2 to bring down Doc Seismic, just like old times, huh? And obviously Mark and Eve beat him, oh. Okay. With no options left, Cecil sends in Sinclair's Reaniman and Darkwing 2. Mark is rightfully pissed off about seeing the Reaniman as well as Darkwing. They did some pretty messed up things. More so Sinclair than Darkwing, I think, because, you know, Darkwing was a murderer, don't get me wrong, but Sinclair was a torturer and a mutilator and, yeah, just real messed up guy. But on the other hand, it's only thanks to Darkwing and Sinclair that the bad Doc Seismic even went down. But Mark gets real angry and doesn't waste a second before going and confronting Cecil about it. Not without apologizing to Eve first though, of course, because obviously you gotta put your girl first. But Mark isn't sugarcoating it and aggressively calls out Cecil on his bullshit. I mean, hell, even now his friends and he himself are still suffering the ripple effects of what Sinclair had done. Cecil explains to Mark that both Sinclair and Darkwing went through intense and severe psychological reprogramming, and that you shouldn't waste people like that, you should reform them. And you know, I don't totally disagree with Cecil here. After all, if a criminal is willing to own up to their actions and then spend their lives doing right, trying to pay their unrepayable debts, then that's a good thing. And just like we saw in the trailers, Cecil calls out Mark for killing Angstrom Levy and questioning if he should lock Mark up too, because Mark is by definition a murderer. And you know, granted, Angstrom Levy was completely unhinged, completely insane and out of his mind, and needed to go down, regardless of anything else. It was obviously an accident, and Mark tries to say that it's different, but in truth, and kind of by principle, it's not all too different. And as we all know, Cecil brings Mark into the White Room, where Mark continues to express his unwavering disapproval of Cecil working with these criminals. But when Mark questions why they're even in there, Cecil declares that it's for his protection. From Mark. Before we continue with the plot, I want to take a moment to pause. If you've been paying attention, I'm sure you've noticed a parallel between Cecil and Mark by now. Cecil used to think exactly like Mark did, that you should never work with criminals no matter what. And this is just the first parallel, we got a couple more to talk about. It's clear that Cecil brought Mark into the White Room because, well, he was kind of paranoid and worried that Mark was gonna attack him. Cecil even says himself,
"Because you're scaring the shit out of me right now."
And even though he said it was for his protection, that protection quickly turns into a threat towards Mark.
Don't, Mark. I'm warning you.
And that claims of protection turning into a threat is honestly kind of rich, because later in their fight, Cecil calls Mark a hypocrite. Oh really, Cecil? Mark's the hypocrite. Is that so? If I recall correctly, back in the White Room you said, and I quote, "You threaten people who disagree with you." But isn't that exactly what Cecil is doing in the White Room right now and during their fight? Yes. Yes, it is. Cecil is criticizing Mark for the exact thing Cecil himself is doing right now. Mark challenged Cecil's viewpoints and values and demanded some transparency, which I think he was completely in the right to do. And instead of talking with Mark, Cecil led him into the White Room and started threatening him. Remember earlier when I said this wasn't the first parallel between these two? Well, let's go over a couple more. If you think about it, Mark is just young Cecil in this conflict. Back when Cecil was trying to help the old director of the GDA get away from the Lizard League, he shot those two reformed criminals in the head. And here in the present, Mark is completely destroying and eviscerating the Reanimen built by Sinclair. In Mark's eyes, the Reanimen pretty much are Sinclair and pretty much are criminals. And, well, he killed them, just like how Cecil did. And another clever parallel between these two is that right after Cecil got his skin burned off, he got artificial skin. And right after Mark got his brains fried out by Cecil, he went and got a new supersuit. There's very obvious and clear parallels between Mark and Cecil, and these two characters are probably a lot similar than either of them would like to admit. And this fight and this falling out and this conflict between them really highlights what they're both good at, and it highlights what they're not so great at. And it's very obvious that these two are not very good at talking and communicating and debating their values and ideologies in a constructive way. But ultimately, both of these characters are both trying to save the world. And who can fault them for that? Thank you so much for watching this video, and yeah, this video was not what I originally had planned to make. Regardless though, I still think it came out pretty decently, and you know, it's still Invincible. I still get to talk about Invincible, probably one of my favorite animated shows of all time. And the writing and the layers and the parallels between this little falling out between Mark and Cecil just continues to prove why it's such a good show. Next week I plan to get back to regular old episodic coverage like I did with season 2, but I have a couple other ideas for Invincible related videos that I'd like to make. For example, a video talking about individual characters and taking a deep dive into like their psyches and their values and stuff like that. I think that could be a lot of fun. So if you want to stick around to see all the Invincible content that's yet to come, then be sure to hit the like and sub button. And if you want to show me some extra support and you just like the way I do things, then definitely consider becoming a channel member. Not only do you get a whole bunch of exclusive rewards, but you also directly support me in the process, and it would just mean a whole lot to me. But that's gonna do it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, have a good day, everyone.